everyone, and welcome to a new seminar on the 2023-2024 Affin cycle. The seminar today is with Theresa Trimmel, and since she's coming from University of Bristol, today we're going to do it in English, and I hope it will be okay for everyone. So that being said, we are here in our third cycle, and the seminars are being done by researchers, postdocs, professors, which are connected to Affin Research Group from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Also, we have various experts which are invited, and they also research topics which are related to what Affin is usually having research on. One of the main topics is human reproduction, gender, sexuality, family, childhood, adolescence, the taking care of someone, health, and also reproductive losses in others. All our sessions are realized on the Zoom platform every Thursday, or well, almost every Thursday at 2 o'clock in European Central Hour. And the link is always the same, which you can also find it on our social networks. So as I said before, today we are with Theresa Trimmel, and she's going to give a seminar called Constructing Good Mothers, Representation of Motherhood and Maternal Care on Netflix. To give you some hint to know on who Theresa is, she is a PhD in film studies in University of Sussex, UK. And she's also a lecturer in film and television in the Department of Television and Film School of Arts in University of Bristol. She researches a lot of topics, but she's interested in production, audience, and text of contemporary studies of television and film, which also includes production and reception of television, of contemporary television. Also, this being in contemporary worldwide studies. And she also researches the representation of gender, race, and sexuality in these texts. To give you more of an insight of what we're going to do today, her presentation will be about 40 minutes, and then we'll have some time for questions or inclusion to have a discussion on the topics, and then we'll see how it evolves. So this being said, thank you, Theresa, for being here today. It will be very interesting to hear you out, and when you want, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Thenaida, for this very nice and lovely introduction. Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to talk with you a little bit about my research. Before I start, I just want to make sure you can see my PowerPoint presentation, right? Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. So yeah, as you said, I'm a film and television scholar, and my research specialism lies specifically in contemporary global television and gender studies. And in my research, I'm also very interested in, as you've said, the representation of gender, race, and sexuality in film and television, in front of, but also behind the camera. And on this slide, here, you can see a list of my most recent publications, which all predominantly examine female representations on screen and behind the camera in the film and television industries. But as you can see, and this will be quite relevant to kind of like later on tell you a little bit more about my methodology. I'm not only looking at representations on screen or behind the camera, I'm also very interested in production, promotion, and reception discourses of film and television production. That means I've studied, for instance, how TV shows, for instance, that were or that featured female protagonists, how they were promoted and received by audiences. I've researched different strategies TV channels, production companies, and online streaming providers have employed to promote their productions and their companies' channels and so on. And I've also explored women vulnerability behind the scenes of British television, where, for instance, conducted interviews with female professionals about the experiences of working behind the scenes in the creative industries. So just to give you a little bit a general overview of my research and my methods that I've applied. My presentation today is based on research I've started quite recently and focuses on the depiction of motherhood and maternal care on Netflix. Obviously, this connects with my research interests in gender and contemporary television and film, because I also think it's quite important to look at these, representations of mothers and motherhood in contemporary popular visual culture, because these representations strongly shape our understanding of gender and gender roles, but also show us, how motherhood is often judged within our society, but also how mothers, it also shows us certain expectations that exist in our society about how mothers should behave, how they should feel, how mothers should physically look, right? So all these cultural productions produce these kind of like images that kind of like express these expectations. And television scholar Kim Ackes argues that it's actually quite important to study these representations that we see, for instance, representations of motherhood and mothers that we see on television, because she thinks that they can teach us much about the ingrained attitudes of a neoliberal Western patriarchal society, how it views motherhood, and the impact that has on women in society more broadly. Understanding how visual media, news, journalism, and society are inextricably intertwined is vital if we are to understand why women continue to be oppressed. So in her statement, Ackes highlights the importance of depictions of motherhood that we can see on our screens, as they inform, of course, as I've mentioned before, cultural attitudes towards mothers, mothering, maternity, and so on. They also underline a strong, connection between such images and the discursive networks that surround these films and television shows, such as news journalism, as she highlights in her comment. And in this research project that I've just started recently, that focuses on, motherhood specifically on Netflix, I'm particularly interested in exploring these connections, examining films and television shows that were produced and released by Netflix that focus specifically on motherhood and reproduction. But I'm also keen on examining how themes such as abortion, miscarriage, and stillbirth are represented on screen. I want to explore how notions of ideal motherhood are formed, how they are reproduced, but also contested. And I seek to analyze how such content fits within Netflix's brand identity, and how obviously these shows and this motherhood-focused content is promoted and received by Netflix audiences. So my research in this topic not only focuses on on-screen representation of motherhood, but also on all these discursive networks that surround these productions and Netflix as an online streaming provider. And for today's presentation, I've prepared 3 quite interesting case studies that I will examine in more detail. The first one is a Canadian television show called Working Moms, which was produced by a Canadian broadcast TV channel, CBC, but then was picked up and globally distributed by Netflix in 2019. So I've checked this. In Spain, you should be able to access this show, for instance. And it's a comedy show that chronicles the life of 4 moms and how they kind of like navigate their life, their professional life and their family life. The second example I'll be looking at today is the Netflix film Pieces of a Woman, which came out in 2020 and offers a very complex representation of stillbirth and grief. And the last example I'm looking at is a Netflix promotional campaign from 2021, which was called Motherhood in Focus. And this campaign consisted of a series of short documentaries about working mothers, but also consists of, or has at least one video that kind of like pays tribute to women working behind the scenes in Hollywood. And as you can see, they're quite like a broad range of like visual examples that we're going to be looking at today. And I also briefly want to highlight why Netflix offers itself as quite an interesting example. to obviously, you know, explore important issues such as motherhood and reproduction. First and foremost, obviously, you know, Netflix has a very global dominance and impressive number of 260 million global subscribers. So this means that any film or television show that Netflix kind of like distributes is obviously accessible to a very wide audience, and Netflix thus has a very crucial transnational impact on how, you know, images of motherhood are understood. And the online streaming provider has drastically increased the rate of you know, subscriptions and expansion in the last 5 years, specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is specifically the time period when all these 3 examples that I'm talking about today were released. So Netflix, you know, I don't know how much you're aware of this, but Netflix actually offers quite an extensive library of film and television shows that focus on motherhood and mothers and women. And here you can see some of the examples that would fit into that category. I found them basically just putting keywords such as motherhood, mother, mom, maternity, maternal into my Netflix content search bar. And you can see, I mean, this is just a very small number of the shows that actually, shows and films that actually came up. And you can see it's quite a wide range of productions, including crime documentaries, romantic comedies, you know, comedy shows, drama, television programs, and so on. And, you know, some of them are US TV shows and US produced films, but some of them are from different countries. So it's quite, you see, this topic of motherhood or mothers is quite a, I would say, quite a big subcategory in their programming. What I've also seen, you know, when I was conducting my research for, or started my research on this, I started like looking at the content on motherhood that was available on Netflix. But then I also looked and Googled, you know, Netflix films, you know, focusing on motherhood and mothers. And suddenly I saw all these newspaper articles that kind of like came up, which actually were lists of, you know, Netflix films that focused on motherhood. So I remember one of these lists was, for instance, I think something like, oh, you know, the 10 best films on Netflix about motherhood that you should watch, or, you know, the 5 best films or TV shows that you should watch with your mom. So obviously this category of motherhood focused content became also quite popular, you know, within reception discourses. And these kind of like first research attempts that I did clearly showed me that content about motherhood and maternity has become one of the many subcategories that are available on you know, the streaming provider. And Netflix has quite intensively promoted this subcategory to attract obviously female viewers, I assume, but also, as I further argue, to engage with socio-political discourses in order to be relevant. And with that, I mean that because, you know, obviously this promotional campaign and the case studies that I'm discussing, you know, in a few minutes, they were all released during quite an interesting but also troubled time in the United States. Obviously, first and foremost, the time after 2016 was heavily influenced by Donald Trump and his quite controversial presidency. Throughout the 4 years of the Trump administration, we saw the introduction of several policies and regulations that have clearly threatened women and their progress, taking away women's health, employment, economic security, and rights overall. And these rules and introduction of new policies have clearly negatively affected every aspect of women's life in the United States, including women's ability to control their bodies, demand equal pay, and protect themselves against sexual violence. And such policy changes have had a huge impact on female reproductive rights, as just recently the US Supreme Court overturned the constitutional protection for pre-viability abortion confirmed in Roe versus Wade, which you've probably heard about in the news. However, all these rather misogynistic policies and discourses that we see emerging specifically during the Trump presidency also coexist with an intensified visibility of feminist politics in popular culture. As several scholars have argued, since the early 2010s, feminism has become increasingly prevalent. Feminism is now considered popular and is clearly having a moment. And this new luminosity of feminism, as scholar Rosalind Gill describes it in 2016, is particularly visible in renewed media interest in feminist stories and the exploration of women-centered themes in popular culture. And we see these feminist discourses, of course, through the intensified visibility of demonstrations, and women-centered movements, where women were obviously, on the streets fighting for their rights. We see this quite well as well through the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement in 2017 and 18. We see this through the numerous celebrities that now openly identify as feminists, that now openly talk about abortion, mistreatment in the entertainment industries, and so on. But we also see this, for instance, through books such as Lean In, which was written by former Facebook CEO Sheryl Sandberg. And it's a book that focuses on female leadership and women's workplace empowerment. But we also see these feminist discourses in quite a lot of television programs and films that explore, as I've said, different female experiences and women-centered issues. And often such cultural productions demonstrate a lot of self-awareness, of these kind of like coexistence of feminist discourses and these intensified discourses of misogyny. And they obviously explore this in their programs in quite a direct way. And this already brings me to the first case study I'm going to talk with you about, which is the comedy show Working Moms. And this show clearly demonstrates the self-awareness I've just been talking about. It's a Canadian TV show, as I've mentioned, that focuses on a group of 4 female friends that deal with the challenges of being working mothers. The series clearly challenges notions of ideal motherhood, as we see the 4 main characters really struggling to balance their professional and family life. We see them often overwhelmed with their motherhood duties. They are messy, they are imperfect, and not particularly motherly, as they're actually not really portrayed as warm, caring, or loving. Let me show you a clip to give you a better idea what the show is about. I'll show you a trailer here from the first season.
If you want to bring 1 foot forward into a lunge and a half moon crescent, and then come down, for a boat pose.
Can we all be brave adults and just admit that babies don't need yoga?
Today, I thought we'd talk about how many of you are coming up on the end of your maternity leave.
You're gonna be late.
Yeah, I'm just saying goodbye. It's a traditional custom here on Earth.
Hard to break it up.
They're gonna fire you, Kate.
All right, cool. Here we go.
So, HR tells me you have a room to do your milking thing.
Yes, this office.
That'll put on quite a show.
Yeah, I think I'll use the bathroom. Yes, this is Kate. No, I'm not busy at all.
You got the feet. Love you.
I'm not so sure I want to go back to work. 8 months is not that much time. Soldiers with PTSD are given longer.
Are you comparing yourself to a war hero?
No, of course not. Childbirth is way harder.
I got my first open house today.
I fantasize a car would just hit me, just take me away from all this.
You're talking about a vacation.
Yes. Like a brain dead vacation.
Date night. I am running just a little bit late.
Should I just go home?
No. Easy does it. What's the trick to making all this work? I'm trying to stay positive. It seems a little impossible.
Hey, are you okay?
All right. So, as you could see in the trailer of the series, the 4 female protagonists do not really live up to a natural or ideal maternal role. Working Moms challenges the heavy romanticization of maternalism that we so often see in popular culture. The mothers on this show don't enjoy being mothers. They are not particularly caring and manifest less sentimental emotional logics in this respect. We barely see them laugh or smile when they are with their kids, as you can see on these images on the slides. They always seem exhausted, they always seem tired, frustrated, and often they don't even enjoy being around their own kids. These women also quickly realize that having a fulfilled private life successfully balanced with a career is impossible just due to the unattainable pressures and expectations mothers experience. And these expectations, for instance, are related to perfection in their parenting. They should spend a lot of time with their children. They should always look rested, should always look after their bodies, but also they should always look after their mind. They should be confident, and they should really be the best version of themselves. And all these kind of like imperatives that are associated with motherhood in popular culture, they are really reflecting neoliberal mantras of self-regulation, which I think the show is very much aware of and clearly criticizes. For instance, as you've seen in the trailer, when the protagonist Kate decides to go back to work, it's really challenging for her because she doesn't have a private space for her to pump up her breast milk. She's constantly confronted by her male co-workers who make some sexist jokes about her being a mother. And it also seems she's quite often undermined by her co-workers because they seem to have the opinion that since she's a mother, she can't do her job as well as she did before. So the show quite self-consciously engages with this and with this idea of, mothers being less skilled or less able to do certain jobs or succeed in their career because they now have kids to look after. And the show quite, obviously by using comedy, quite nicely criticizes that in an indirect way. And I think in doing so, the show clearly highlights the character's disillusionment with motherhood and the myth that happiness can be achieved through marriage and kids. The show, as you've seen in the trailer, uses comedy, specifically cringe comedy and exaggerations, to not only be funny, but to also articulate this self-conscious critique of unattainable expectations towards mothers and women, and clearly explores these expectations and pressure surrounding motherhood and parenting in more detail. And this becomes especially evident in numerous scenes that we see throughout the program's 7 seasons, where the show where the scene basically focuses on several of the mothers sitting together and talking about their parenting. And it kind of like becomes clear that these kind of like mommy groups are quite hostile. They are quite competitive. Let's watch a clip where you probably see a little bit better what I mean. There you go.
Ow! Charlie, no! No hitting! What's wrong?
It's just that this is a no-free circle. It's important.
So, you guys never say no?
No.
So can I borrow $100,000? Can't say no.
Oh, do you need money?
No, of course not.
Because I could talk to my husband.
Yeah?
I'm kidding, jeez. Why not? Come on.
No, totally.
Come on.
I'm more joking than you. I'm totally financially stable.
Yeah.
Well, this has been great. This has been a really fun play date. We're gonna hit it though, because we got a lot of errands to run. But you guys, Sarah should get all your numbers, and we'll do this again.
Right. So, as you've been able to see in this clip, Working Moms is very self-aware of pressures surrounding motherhood and parenting, specifically pressures that are created within these mommy groups. We see a lot of judgment and surveillance going on in these groups. And especially once one of the mothers makes a controversial comment or statements about parenting, then, you know, these scenes usually are followed by quite a long silence, with the camera lingering on, focusing on other mothers and their shocked faces, which creates awkwardness and this kind of like cringe feeling, and signals the discomfort of the situation to the viewer. The series obviously has its limitations, you know, in terms of racial diversity, the diversity of body types, because all the women the show focuses on are women that definitely have bodies that respond to a heteronormative beauty ideal. They are hyper feminine and obviously from an upper middle class. Nevertheless, despite these limitations, I think the show offers a very interesting criticism against pressures and judgments mothers encounter within maternity groups, but also at home, at work, and in other public spaces. The second example I want to talk about is the Netflix film Pieces of a Woman. And if you haven't seen the film, you will probably notice in the next few minutes, it's very, very different to Working Moms, because it obviously is a drama film about a couple that experiences a stillbirth at home, and then the show kind of like, the film explores how the different characters deal with their grief, as each of the characters in the film processes the loss of the baby differently. And what's quite special about this Netflix production is that the birth is the representation of the birth at the beginning of the film, which is a 25-minute long scene. I can't really remember any film that actually focuses on birth for such a long time. So it's quite rare to have this extensive focus on you know, the event of a birth. Nevertheless, this 25-minute scene is very, very intense. It's very obviously traumatic because it obviously shows the complications that can happen during birth. And, you know, it obviously ends with the loss of the baby. And as I said, these are images that we usually don't see in the film. I'm not going to show you a clip because, as I've said, it's quite intense and disturbing to watch the different parts of this scene. But I just want to run you through it a little bit because I think it's really, really interesting depiction. First and foremost, what's important to notice, the scene doesn't have any soundtrack, right? So there's no non-diegetic sound. The only thing the viewer hears are actually the loud breathing of Martha, who is the blonde woman. We hear her screams of pain and agony. We hear the midwife and her husband trying to reassure her, trying to calm her down. So it's actually a very dramatic scene that's already just created by the sound, meaning the diegetic sound, which are these screams and the heavy breathing of the mother. And I know you're not film students, but I think it's also quite important to mention that this 25-minute scene of the birth has no editing. So it's just a 25-minute long take with no interruptions. The camera is not handheld because usually it happens very often when you have a handheld camera, the image gets quite wobbly. But here the director decided to use a kind of like gimbal to support the camera, and makes the movements of the camera a lot more smoothly or smooth. And this use of the camera actually allows the director to get closer to the characters or to the actors, right? And as you can see, we have quite a lot, and you can see this on the images on the slides. We have quite a lot of shots that actually frame or show the face specifically of Martha, the female character. And we see, you know, her pain in her face. We see her tense body. We see, you know, her screaming. So that's what this use of this very specific camera setup actually kind of like is quite useful for, to kind of like transmit this rather, you know, this agony and quite dramatic, or this moment that's filled with quite a lot of stress, tension, and drama. And I think what I, at least watching it personally, I also had the feeling, because the camera often went so close to the characters, it almost became a little bit claustrophobic, which I thought quite nicely transmitted this, feeling, or how the characters on screen must feel. As I've said, usually we don't see a lot of representations of stillbirth and grief that a mother, a father, or relatives experience when somebody has stillbirth. But the film, or specifically Pieces of a Woman, fits within, I don't want to call it trend, but there have been recently more specifically TV productions that actually show more brutal and more, intense moments of birth. I mean, there was one film that came out in 2014 called Return to Zero that also focuses on stillbirth. But in regards to television, we see actually these quite brutal representations of birth, which are quite, I mean, they are not as long as in Pieces of a Woman, but they are nevertheless quite bloody, quite, loud, because we hear the characters screaming. And you probably, if you have watched The Handmaid's Tale, you'll probably remember there are quite a few disturbing birth scenes in that program, also in The House of Dragon and in Dead Ringers. What I also briefly want to mention is, obviously, if you think about Pieces of a Woman is a Netflix production, but also The Handmaid's Tale, House of the Dragon, and Dead Ringers. They are all on online streaming providers, or were released by online streaming providers. And the reason for that is because of, usually on traditional broadcasting television, these channels can't show dramatic scenes like that because of advertising venues. Obviously they also have to, I would say, attract or address broader audiences, but online streaming providers don't really have any limitations in regards to censorship. They can really show whatever they want. So obviously The Handmaid's Tale, House of the Dragon, I mean, it's an HBO Max production, but it could even be shown on HBO, because HBO is a premium cable channel that also doesn't depend on any censorship regulations, really. So I think a reason why we might see this more intensified, visibility of disturbing birth scenes has probably to do with the intensification of online streaming platform where this type of content can be shown. I also briefly want to talk about the exploration of grief after a stillbirth in Pieces of a Woman. I thought it was quite interesting how the film managed to explore, several different perspectives, or several different ways how people deal with grief. For instance, Martha's partner, Sean, he's very emotional. We see him crying a lot throughout the film. He constantly wants to talk about the loss of his child. He wants to find, kind of like explanations as to why the baby died. And he constantly also wants to have explanations from Martha, or have conversations with Martha about it. However, Martha is more, closed off. She doesn't really show any emotions until the very end. And here the image at the bottom is quite at the end, where we actually see her afterwards crying. But throughout the film, she's actually quite emotionally composed and shows emotional decorum. Here again, we could argue, oh, this probably has to do with, kind of like neoliberal imperatives of self-regulation. But I think it's a lot more complex, because you see, obviously, in the film, there are a lot of close-ups of Vanessa Kirby's character that obviously capture her facial expressions and, her, not necessarily her thoughts, but I think the camera clearly, gives a nice side onto how she actually feels. And I think, it also, like, these kind of representation of grief, especially of, the grief after the loss of a child, I think also introduces interesting questions about how mothers are supposed to grieve, right? Do they have to cry? Do mothers need to be emotional and cry and open with their feelings in order to show, you know, that they care? So I thought that was actually quite an interesting question that, at least for me, came up when watching and analyzing the film. A scene I also want to highlight is a brief, you know, moment between Martha and her mother, where they have, you know, a confrontation, because Martha's mother Martha's mother blames her for the death of her baby because Martha decided not to go to hospital to give birth, but instead decided to stay at home. So I think, you know, as you can see, she says to Martha, if you had done it my way, you'd be holding your baby in your arms right now. So obviously, again, this, I think, indirectly engages with the idea, what does maternal care actually mean, right? How do different women interpret this idea? I think it's also this kind of like argument these two women have also speaks to generational differences, right? Different, you know, differences in regards to mothering, maybe maternal responsibilities, but also, you know, differences in terms of how they deal with grief, right? So I thought that was quite interesting how the show depicted that, how different mothers of different generations, you know, explore their grief or articulate their grief. So as you've seen, you know, these two examples I've mentioned so far are very self-aware of the complexities of motherhood, reproduction, and maternal care. And I want to now look at my last example, which is a little bit different than the two texts I've discussed before. And it's the Netflix promotional campaign called Motherhood in Focus, which came out in summer 2021. And the campaign consisted, amongst others, of a short documentary series, which viewers could interestingly find not on Netflix, but on the streaming provider's YouTube channel. And the series of short documentaries focuses on the experience of working mothers, meaning women working as firewomen or firemen, doctors and astronauts. And they also kind of like focus on not only how they, you know, navigate their job, but also the fact, you know, that they were mothers and how they navigate parenting and combine these two areas. And Netflix has also released a video about mothers working behind the scenes in Hollywood, which I'm going to show you in a little while and discuss in more detail. But I briefly just want to show you how Netflix actually described this Motherhood in Focus campaign. They describe it on their website as a tribute to working moms in Hollywood, that it was viewed by millions and shared by thousands of mothers across the world. Not quite sure about the number, but you know, I don't know officially if that's true, but anyways. They further say this video captured the emotions faced by so many working mothers, the struggles, the challenges, the hustle, and the strength. Women forge new paths, break stereotypes, overcome challenges, and push for progress in vocations that have been historically male-dominated or deemed incompatible with motherhood. So on a first glance, when I saw this for the first time, I thought, oh, it looks quite promising and definitely, you know, aligns with contemporary discourses of feminism in popular culture. But let's have a look at the clip, and then I give you some of my thoughts I have about that clip.
You can start whenever you're ready.
Okay. To the mothers who work like mothers, the ones who hide your bump for fear of losing your job, the ones that show up proud and pregnant, the ones that pump in your car and squeeze into stalls and give the director's chair new meaning.
Cut. That was great. That was amazing.
The ones that come back with stitches, pads, and backaches after giving birth and are asked, how did you enjoy your time off? The ones that fought for a chair, a trailer to nurse, or childcare on location. We see you. You're not difficult, or a liability, or entitled. You're a mother. This is a mother. This is a mother. This is a mother. So to all the mothers, just keep going like the mother you are. Shoot like a mother. Think like a mother. Lead like a mother. Mother like a mother. Wake up before light, ready for action, skipping bedtime, even if it breaks you. Set up, break down, and do it all again like a mother. Laugh like a mother. Cry like a mother. Fight like a mother. Take a seat. Take up space. And take what's yours. Show them what a mother can do.
All right. So the clip, as you've seen, obviously shows women working on set behind the scenes as producers, writers, I think even costume designers and so on. And you could obviously hear the video contains some quite inspiring imagery and emotive voiceover. While the camera cuts to various women, some of them are, having their children with them at work. Some of them are expecting. And while while several of these mothers look after their kids, they are also on set doing their job. They are breastfeeding and so on. And I think generally, you can see in the video, all these different mothers are definitely represented as, very motherly, very warm, very caring, which I found very interesting. Like I thought it was a very stereotypical representation of motherhood, besides the fact, obviously we saw them being mothers on set while working. And no question, I think the voiceover is quite inspiring and embraces feminist language of female empowerment and solidarity. But I also thought that some of the statements that were made are actually quite problematic because they contain a lot of neoliberal rhetoric, but also, they normalize the working conditions under which these women have to work, meaning being a mother and looking after the kids while they're actually working. And I think the way how mothering is represented in this video puts a lot of expectations and pressures on mothers, right? And it normalizes these working conditions that we see on screen, not having childcare available for them on set, having to go back to work while still breastfeeding or while still having stitches or working until very late into their pregnancy. The video almost normalizes having to work while also looking after the kids. And I think it almost even celebrates, these working conditions, setting an impossible standard for women. The language in the voiceover, as I've said, is full with neoliberal rhetoric, indicating that women need to adapt, they need to be resilient, they need to be strong, they need to be confident, they need to work hard. But it should actually not be these mothers that need to adapt, but rather, it should be the industry, or it should be the company, or the online streaming provider who should offer more support like childcare for these women. And just to give you some background information, in the US, where the ad was filmed, mothers are legally entitled only to 12 weeks of unpaid maternity leave. And from what I've found, doing some research online, Netflix actually does in fact have a very progressive parental leave policy, offering full-time employees up to 1 year off. However, only to full-time salaried full-time employees, right? Which sounds good, but most of the women we saw in these videos have positions that, are usually done by freelancers. So they are not full-time employed. So actually all these benefits and progressive parental regulations that Netflix offers doesn't really apply to the women we see in the video. So these women probably, even if they would be working for Netflix, I assume wouldn't have the entitlement to longer paid leave. So I think, that's quite interesting to keep in mind when looking at these promotional campaigns. And this video in particular has been quite contested online. A lot of viewers, have kind of discussed how on the one hand, it seems to be quite an empowering video and promotional campaign, but on the other hand, Netflix hasn't, doesn't really suggest any solutions for instance, freelancers who work in the industry. And in this campaign, the streaming provider also doesn't really suggest any ideas how the situation for women could be improved, or how they actually plan to support working moms to take away some of the burdens of being working mothers. And to me, therefore, looking at it from a, I would say, industry study perspective, I feel it's quite clear that, motherhood and the focus on female professional mothers in the industry is obviously used, for promotional purposes. It's a very commodified version of feminist discourses that we see in this video, and that we see, dominating Netflix's promotional material. And I think it's quite an interesting contrast. While, the productions that we've looked at before, the first two examples, while they seem to be quite self-aware, the promotional material is actually quite, problematic of women-centered or mother-centered issues. And this already brings me to the end of the presentation. And I just want to kind of like summarize a few of the points I've, hopefully been able to highlight today. So obviously you've seen I've analyzed 3 different types of text that all, explore motherhood in different ways. Some of them are more critical than others. Nevertheless, I feel we definitely see that, neoliberal rhetoric and imperatives still very much dominate these representations. However, as we've seen, Netflix has obviously used motherhood and mother-related, themes to promote themselves, to promote the streaming provider, to promote their productions, to not, I think, only attract viewers, but obviously also to be socially relevant, because obviously all these themes that I explored in the film, in the TV show, but also in the promotional campaign are very close to, discourses we see in popular feminism these days. So yeah, and with that, I leave you. Thank you so much for hanging out. I think I went a little bit over time, but yeah.
Thank you very much for this presentation, Theresa. It was really insightful.
Thank you.
And I think you showed a reality on streaming TV or streaming platforms. How can we call them that? A lot of the times maybe we don't give this critical view to what we're actually watching. And also, I remember what you said in the beginning, with the thousands of millions of people which are subscribed to Netflix. It's crazy, the amount of people, and then what's the content about. And what I found really maybe shocking, what the video you showed at the end, I don't remember now the name, how it was called, but this
Motherhood in Focus.
Yes, that one. Thank you. That I don't know. I find it interesting that they showed all this support into motherhood when the policies on motherhood leave, or how can you actually work your life around being not even a mother, if I could say this, as in the idea of being a take carer of children, which is very, very difficult in the United States these days. And I was wondering, what's your personal opinion on this video? Well,
so I personally, I think the video it's very problematic, right? For several of the reasons I've discussed. I feel like it's almost using, like motherhood, or Netflix is almost using motherhood to promote themselves. Because obviously with, on the one hand, if you look at the video, it seems like very feminist, right? Very empowering women, and but then if you look, a little bit closer, it's actually really, really problematic. And I feel like, just the rhetoric that is used, kind of like asking women, oh, be strong, be confident, be a mother, do stuff like a mother. It's like, yeah, okay, but what can you as a streaming platform, or as, the industry, what can be changed actually? What do they offer, or what does Netflix offer to mothers who work on their productions? from what I found, not much, to be honest, which is the sad reality, really. But I think the video quite well shows, if you kind of like create a socially or a promotional video that's quite socially relevant, it gets a lot of hype and a lot of interest of people that then again maybe makes people sign up for the for the streaming platform, or maybe makes them watch stuff, on the streaming platform as well. So
Thank you very much, Theresa. I'm gonna leave now open. No, if anyone has any questions, which they can ask them through the mic, no, so everyone can hear them. Or if you feel more comfortable writing them in the chat, we can read them, and then Teresa can answer. So I don't know if anyone has any question, comment, or whatever. Yes, Carolina.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
Can you listen to me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa. It was a wonderful presentation. I love it. And I really appreciate your suggestions of materials we can use for a project we have on gestational losses. And I found this movie, Pieces of Women, very interesting and insightful for think about this question you put, how mothers are supposed to grieve, because we found a variety of experiences and perspectives on grief, and sometimes mothers who lost their babies in the first trimester, they don't grieve.
Yeah.
And it's a very valid position against of hegemonic ideas about grief. So thank you, because it's a very interesting material to go and explore. And another thing I want to comment related to this documental Motherhood in Focus is some weeks ago, a famous cooker from Argentina, she's called Narda Lépez, gave an interview which became viral because she wonders about how much money she lost with health leaves in her restaurant. And obviously she has female and male workers, and asked to her accountant how much I paid for health leaves the last year, and she found that mothers usually don't take leaves, against of these stereotype ideas that you don't, it's better do not contract women because women have all the time maternity leaves and etc. And she found that male employees had the highest level of absence at work, and the health leaves are because they are hurt because they play football and everything, do sport. And it's more expensive to hire men than women. And it's interesting because it opened a debate around these ideas of motherhood and childcare and women's health and etc. And well, I found interesting because this documental, I think, put the accent on be mother first of all. Be mother first, being, no sé, director or, or being a leader or being etc. So something to share about this polemic document.
No, and I think you're right. It's really interesting because, obviously there's still, like, I feel in society very often, no matter if we talk about the US or the UK or Spain, I feel very often there's still this idea that the mother is the first carer. So it's usually the mother that, you know, has to, I guess, pick up the child from kindergarten if they're sick, and it's usually the mother, I assume, or there probably is the belief that it's usually the mother who has to do these things, you know, or can't go to work because of, you know, as being the first carer. But I think, you know, as you said, it's kind of like a wrong impression, probably, as you've said, from that very specific case, because men get ill for other reasons or can't do their job properly for other reasons. So I was quite surprised from what you told me. I think it's a really interesting observation, right? Because it kind of like very much goes against this kind of like thought that seems to be quite established, that women are less reliable once they have kids as a professional. So yeah, thanks for the comment. It's very interesting.
Sorry, I had my mic turned off. I was saying thank you very much, Theresa and Carolina. And I think Bruna has another question. I think it froze, or she has her mic turned off. Bruna, tienes el micro apagado. Maybe you want to write down the question or comment, and I can read it for you if you can't make it work. No, it doesn't work still. In the meantime, while we solve this technical issue, I don't know if is there anyone else who would like to share some thoughts. Julia?
First of all, thank you, Theresa, for this presentation. I loved it and I enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Especially, yeah, really, because and also the no free zone scene, I particularly loved it because it's very similar to the experience of Moms Group in Barcelona.
Oh,
it
yeah.
has this little hippie point that's very present there. So I wanted to ask you a question about the two topics inside motherhood. There are, I think, the two topics that the ones we are here are, at least I talk about maybe Caro and me, and for some parts also Bruna. We find it particularly interesting, which is the medical world. So I would like to know if what the stereotypes related to motherhood, if they have some connection with following the doctor's instructions or the pediatrician, or how does the medical world, is it represented, portrayed in the series that you've analyzed? I've seen that you were commenting that there was this scene with the mother of the main character in the second movie, in which she was scolding her for not using the proper birthing unit. And I would like to know if you can think of other examples from the medical world. And the other part is that I find personally very interesting in the motherhood construction is buying and purchasing for the kid objects. We have seen a lot of pumps. We have seen the beer bottle with the nipple top. So objects and purchases are a huge part of contemporary motherhood. And I would like to ask you if you can think of some scenes that you have found interesting about these, or some series that are particularly interested about these, and what do they may say for your research?
These are some very interesting questions. About the first one, right, about medical staff. I had the feeling when watching Pieces of a Woman, the actual hospital staff seemed quite cold, right? Without emotion. So that I feel when I remember when, for instance, the father of the Martha's partner, he's really determined to find out what has happened to why the child died at birth. So, but obviously the doctors say, oh, these things happen. Sometimes you don't find an explanation. And obviously this is the character, or the doctor character says that in quite a emotionless way, right? So I think specifically thinking about Pieces of a Woman and the medical staff there, they are not, they are quite, I would say, emotionless, because I guess that's the type of stereotype from doctors, I guess, on screen. They need to be often, quite, not necessarily pragmatic, but they need to have their emotions in control, because otherwise, you can't, I guess, do the profession. What was quite interesting in Pieces of a Woman, especially during the birth scene, we have the midwife there, right, who helps or supports the couple during the birth. And you see her quite, obviously, it seems she definitely knows what she's doing, but then there are these quite interesting elements. I think I had a picture where you saw her looking into the mirror, which obviously that's when I think you as a viewer, something goes wrong. So it's actually when the midwife shows emotion in that particular scene, it's when you realize as a viewer, I read, to be honest, when I watched the film for the first time, I read at first what it was about. So I kind of like knew what's going to happen. But obviously with, this kind of like visual cues with these shots that show the midwife turned away from the couple, but looking into the mirror, and from the mirror, she sees the woman in agony. And you see, as a viewer, you see the midwife's face, which is obviously very worried. And I think that's an interesting example of, staff or medical staff where they actually show their emotions. And I think, again, it probably raises interesting questions about how much emotions can a medical staff member actually show, right? What is the correct way of performing in a tense scene like this, right? And the second question you asked about all these products that are bought, I actually hadn't thought about this, but this is so interesting, right? Because I remember in Working Moms, so the different women, they all, one of them is pregnant, but the other three, they are all, breast pumping, and they all try to get, but they have all different devices. And one of them suffers from postpartum syndrome. So her pump is quite, pathetic, which, compared to like the electrical ones the other women have. So it's quite, I thought, an interesting contrast that the maybe psychological well-being of, is actually, how can I say that correctly? So you see the depressed mother who suffers from postpartum syndrome, and see her with this very pathetic pump, kind of like pumping, and it's kind of like reflective of how she feels, like I thought that's actually something that immediately came into my mind when you mentioned this. But yeah, I haven't thought about, because I assume it might also be quite interesting to look at what type of toys, right, and learning tools these mothers buy for their kids in these TV shows. So yeah, definitely have to have a look at that again, because I did pay attention to it, but not, not as much to make a strong argument about this. But I think, again, this is a really, really interesting part. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna read now Bruna's comment in the chat. She says, "Thank you very much, Theresa, for your interesting research. I wanted to comment that when we talk about motherhood, there are always small babies, but there are very few films about motherhood of teenagers. That's my situation, for example, or mothers of adults. So it seems that motherhood is limited to the first year of babies.
That's actually
Sorry, in plural.
No, that's actually true. I think Bruna is right with that. There's definitely a lot more focus on like new moms, right? And the challenges new moms experience, you know, once they've had a baby and all the changes that come with you know, having a new family member. Whereas I think, you know, obviously, I mean, I don't have a teenager, I don't have kids, but I assume just thinking about myself being a teenager, I think that can be also quite a challenging, you know, a challenging situation for mothers or for parents, right? Because that also, you know, being a teenager also indicates a lot of changes, which is actually a really good point. And I'm wondering as well, you know, how much it also has to do that, you know, I don't know, to think about, you know, obviously mothers being older when they have teenagers. Maybe that has an impact as well of how, you know, women at age and their representation on screen, if that makes sense.
Bruna said that's a very interesting situation to make a film about it. And
Yeah.
Bruna answers, maybe this is as the series I comment you, Bruna, today in Amazon Prime or Netflix is a good example of transitioning of motherhood and child and mother-child relationships.
No, I think it's really interesting. I haven't thought about it, but to be honest, a lot of the programs I mean, it's also there are a few films or TV programs on Netflix that actually focus on actually mothers and their grown-up kids, so beyond teenagers. You know, they are in that the children are in their 20s. And you know, it's like these mothers kind of like figuring out what life is like once the children are independent, right? Which I think is interesting. I haven't thought about it, but I think, you know, obviously they are still mothers, no matter if their kids live with them or not, right? So that's, I think, definitely an interesting point. But also, you know, obviously the exploration of you know, motherhood in regards to teenagers.
There is this one TV series, which I'm not quite sure if it's Netflix now, but I think I saw it on Netflix. It was The Fosters.
Oh, yeah.
Which is it's about a couple. There are two women who take care of foster kids, and I think they have about 5 or 6. No, and they're all teenagers and all the challenges that go with it. But it's more from the perspective of their relationship and the relationship of the kids with other people than the actual motherhood itself.
Yeah, I think that's something that I've come across specifically when, you know, looking at scholarship that discusses motherhood in film or in TV, is that very often, you know, pregnancy or motherhood in itself is not really the narrative drive. It's not really the focus. It's just something the film kind of like mentions, but is not too much interested in exploring in too much detail. I mean, I didn't know that before, but I read as well that actually, you know, since the early 2000s, specifically in Hollywood, we saw a lot more representations of, you know, different, you know, family constellations that are not just man and woman that, you know, conceive a child, but there was a lot more, or there were a lot more films that focused on, you know, a family that adopted a child or a family that conceived through IVF or something like that. But that's, I think, I wouldn't call it like a trend, but rather that it became more visible in Hollywood from the early 2000s on, that, you know, all these technologies associated with reproduction became more visible in film. But again, I think a lot of times it's not what the film is about. You know, it's not about the experience of going through IVF or of going through, you know, as we've seen in Pieces of a Woman, you obviously, it's about stillbirth and what comes after, right? And this whole exploration of, or this quite complex exploration of this issue that we see, for instance, in Pieces of a Woman, it's not the norm, right? In a film, you might see a couple, as I've said, conceiving through IVF, but the whole journey and complexities that are associated with the process, it's not properly explored usually, if that makes sense.
Totally. Thank you very much, Theresa. I don't know if we
Thanks.
have any other questions or comments. I don't think so. And since we're a bit running on short time,
Yeah.
If you would like to add something else, Theresa?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who came, and thank you for your amazing questions, because they actually make me think, you know, about stuff that I can add or think about. And yeah, thank you so much for engaging with me and for coming and for listening to my research. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you too for coming here today, for being with us, and for this wonderful and lovely presentation.
Thank you.
Which I think opened our minds a little bit on
Thanks.
a lot of
That's good to hear. Thank you.
And that being said, I would like to thank everybody who came today, and let them know we're having a little break till 9th of May, when we're coming back for our Thursday seminars with Bruna Álvarez and Hugo Gaggiotti. And the seminar is Movilidades no reproductivas en la frontera, el espacio liminal México-Estados Unidos. And this being said, I hope to see you all and a lot many others in a few weeks. And thank you very much, Theresa, and
Thank
everyone.
you. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Enjoy your day.
You as well. Bye.